Greetings, this is Griff Ruby, the Nostalgic Catholic. We've got another installment of my Isaac Asimov short story reviews, discussions, and of course, introduction to where they came out. And today's story, not on the cover again, but at least in the table of contents, is called Paradoxical Escape by Isaac Asimov, page 79. Paradoxical Escape being the title that got originally published. He wanted to just call it Escape. John Campbell unilaterally decided to change it to Paradoxical Escape. I think partially because he had another story also titled Escape not that long before and didn't want there to be any confusion. And Paradoxical, in a way, it'll kind of make sense in view of what the story itself is about. So, since it starts at page 79, let's take a look at there, because there's the usual things. So here we are, page 79. So, this is one of Powell or Donovan, I'm not sure, looking out this viewport, or viewing whatever. It's not a screen, it's more like a real window to the outside of this spaceship that they've been riding. And they're seeing stars, and I guess that means they're in space, and they didn't even expect that because they didn't have to go through the normal liftoff and all that, just poof, and they're from one place to another. Now this has a little blurb. Let's read the blurb here. It says, the first robot brain that tackled the problem went to pieces. That would be the one with the rival company. The second one they tried it on hit the same insoluble dilemma, but found a way around it, an escape of sorts. But the men weren't happy about it. So, illustrated by Williams. Okay. So, once again, we have Susan Calvin. There's a little passage here that says, when Susan Calvin entered the fantastically guarded vault that held the brain, one of the current shift of technicians had just asked it another question. He's got an answer. Blah, blah. Okay. Dr. Calvin coughed, and there was a sudden and impossible flurry of directionless energy. The psychologist motioned briefly and was alone with the brain. The brain was a 2-foot globe, merely, one which contained within it a thoroughly conditioned helium atmosphere, a volume of space completely vibrant, vibration absent and radiation free, and within that was the unheard of complexity of positronic brain paths that was the brain. The rest of the room was crowded with attachments. Anyway, they're describing all of that, and there's a picture of that great big vault door. Little figure there, if you look closely, it's a feminine figure, that's Susan Calvin. Inside there is the brain. There's our 2-foot smear and just other kind of accoutrements or something surrounding it, connected to the world around it. Okay, so it's kind of a nice drawing. Nice artwork that, of course, you don't get in any of the reprints. There's another part where they are saying, they're in this ship and it's gone somewhere. They have no controls. There's no navigational data, just a single little gauge that tells them how far they are from Earth, from 0 to 1,000,000 parsecs. As in, we're outside the galaxy. So, and that's all. Nothing about what direction they went, just how far away they are. And they can look out and see, oh, there it is. There's a bunch of stars out there, okay. Or they're really between galaxies. It's probably there's a whole bunch of nothing out there. But at any rate, they're trying to communicate. Somebody's able to talk to them, kind of. There's this repetitive thing that keeps going around. That doesn't seem to be what really was said, but okay. And meanwhile, they're trying to shout back, hoping maybe there might be some way of getting that back. It doesn't work that way. So they're just trying to position unknown, ship out of control, condition desperate. So this kind of illustrates that idea. Does that look like it would be a ship out of control situation, desperate? I think that's the impression they're trying to convey here in this picture. So, Then, there's yet another picture where Mike Donovan is just so grateful to make it back to Earth in one piece and alive and well, he kisses the ground. Just sheer appreciation that he's made it back alive and well. So, okay. Are there some textual differences? Yes, even this late. There's a few little tweaks. Some of which you can see the sense of, some of which just kind of make you scratch your head and say, why was that changed? Well, the biggest difference, of course, is that a whole section was added up front. The whole thing that starts with when Susan Calvin returned from hyperspace. Alfred Lanning was waiting for her. The old man never spoke about his age, but everyone knew it to be over 75. Yet his mind was keen, and if he had finally allowed himself to be made Director Emeritus of Research with Bogart as acting director, it did not prevent him. And it's got this whole long thing. Finally, it gets to the part where the original story begins, with Robertson of U.S. Robot and Mechanical Men Corporation, son of the founder, pointed his lean nose at his general manager. So there's a small difference right there, because actually it just kicked right off with Robinson of U.S. Robot and Mechanical Men Corporation pointed his lean nose at his general manager. Nothing about him being the son of anybody in particular, so I don't know if that got added yet. So then the next part, on the next page, there's a rather odd change here. Originally, paragraph read, Robertson frowned and his lean figure seemed to stiffen. That so? But hasn't consolidated a thinking machine of its own? Exactly what makes the whole proposition a foul ball, Chief. It's changed to Robinson frowned and his lean figure stiffened. Despite the fact they have a thinking machine of their own, right? Exactly what makes the whole proposition a foul ball. Okay, so that continues there. Then there's kind of something ripped out from the original. Okay. Alright. So, it originally started like this. It's this way, sir. Consolidated does its best to crack down on our information service. But we haven't missed yet. We didn't miss this time either. They had a thinking machine. It's broken. It's to cut down to just, it's this way, sir. Consolidated had a thinking machine. It's broken. So all this other stuff about cracking down our information service and we haven't missed yet and we didn't miss this time, all that stuff's gone. Okay. Then there's this rather sizable chunk where, for some unknown reason, a whole lot of material. Okay, now on the other hand, there's a place where Lanning, here we go. Originally, we're introducing your guest is Lanning, take it. Dr. Alfred Lanning, Director of the Research Division, viewed the proceedings. Well, we got introduced to Dr. Alfred Lanning at the very beginning that was added. So that's why it just cuts down a little bit. Lanning, take it. Dr. Alfred Lanning viewed the proceedings with faint scorn, and so forth. So we don't have to introduce it. That's pretty straightforward. Okay. Now, there's a somewhat larger thing where they tried to spell out all three robotic laws. They're getting closer, but it still isn't quite honed in on their final way they're going to be phrased. Rather than corrected, for some reason, most of this was just ripped out. So here's a passage here where they're talking about there are no known limits. There are no known limits to the brain's capacity. It's a different matter. It's a question of the robotic laws. So far these are the same. Now, originally there's all this additional. You know them, I suppose. It was a statement. Oh, yes. Robertson slurred them out rapidly. 1. A robot may not, by action or through inaction, harm a human being. 2. A robot must obey orders given by authorized human personnel except where this would conflict with Rule 1. 3. A robot must protect its own existence, except where this would conflict with Rules 1 and 2. Lanning went on. Then those rules are fundamental to robotics. And then the brain, for instance, and that's of course where this one of them is a question of robotic laws, the brain, for instance. All this other enumeration of them. And again, it was simpler just to do that rather than try to hone them to their final way they're going to be worded. They're still rules, not laws. I don't know. I thought they fixed that, but I guess not. The first one, getting closer, but it's still, you cannot injure a human being, nor through inaction allow a human being to come to harm. So somehow it's not quite that. Here it's just you cannot either by action or inaction harm a human being. It must obey orders given by authorized human personnel. Again, if it's authorized, that's a little different than just you have to order whatever human being. That was originally right when we first saw these laws back in, I think, maybe Reason or Liar, one of the really early ones. But later on, it seemed to be fixed, and now suddenly we're back to the older expression again. And then, so with that bit about authorized human persons, in other words, any random human could come along and say, stand on your head for 3 hours, and then the robot would just do it because some human told him to. He's not harming anybody or through inaction causing harm unless there's some obvious first law thing he's got to do, like rescue somebody, so he just does it. And the third law wouldn't matter even if that was going to hurt doing that. But by authorized personnel, it's like that could simplify a lot of the trouble that the laws had, because you just had to go with who's supposed to be, who has business giving the robot orders. Okay. Well, let's see here. And then the third rule was pretty well, except again they're still calling them rules instead of laws, and that's kind of noticeable. So instead of reiterating all that in here, he just cropped all that out. Okay. There's a small bit here which kind of makes one sort of scratch one's head and go, what is this one all about? Let's see if I can find it in the book here. Okay, Lanning set his lips and raised his eyebrows in the direction of the woman next to him, and Dr. Susan Calvin lifted her eyes from her precisely folded hands for the first time. Maybe it's not clear that the woman next to him is Dr. Susan Calvin. So that kind of got changed a little bit here. Lanning set his lips and raised his eyebrows in the direction of Dr. Susan Calvin, who lifted her eyes from her precisely folded hands. So kind of a little clarification there. That kind of made sense. And then I think the last major change comes fairly close to the end. Let's see here. 167. Page 167 in the original book as published by Doubleday. And let's see what it is. Almost beyond this. Okay. It's when Susan Calvin finally understands what the problem had been precisely, and then she can explain everything. When she gets this realization, she says, "Oh my!" she gasped. "Oh my!" The way it sees now just continues on with, and she felt the tension of hours and days released in a burst. It was later she told Lanning, "I tell you it's all right. No, you must leave me alone now. Everything's going to be all right." How did she know all that? Well, there was a little more here. Maybe you could call this pulpishness. I don't know. I think it's oh my, she gasped. Oh my. And then she laughed and laughed and laughed, hysterically and unbearably. The tension of hours and days released in a burst. It was later, weak and spent, that she told Lanning, "I tell you, it's all right." No, you must leave me alone now. It's all the same. So we have some textual differences between the way its original appearance went and the way it shows up in iRobot. So, but let's take a look at the story. The premise is really kind of strange. All right, in the interest of the first law, a robot, and we're going to count our computer as like a robot, even if it's immobile. The brain is immobile; it's in its vault. Somehow is always constrained by the laws of robotics. Anything that could harm a human being, and the thing is, apparently going through hyperspace could be kind of like a death-like experience to the human beings. That could be construed as harm, even if once the transition's over and the human being is reached his destination, he's there, alive, well, and as far as we can tell, unharmed. So, is he harmed or not? But there's that little area in between where it's like he's dead. You killed him, and then you brought him back to life. Well, he just ceased to exist in any normal material part along with all the matter of his ship and everything else. But it's just in this weird hyperspace state that can't be very well defined for some brief period, after which they, the spaceship, and the person and everything aboard all reappears at the destination, all alive and well. But this was kind of the problem. This probably is what destroyed a similar computer at Consolidated Robots, a rival company. When they tried to make this thing happen, the computer said, "Oh, I'd have to do this," and they said, "Well, you have to come up with an answer." The answer is, "I'd have to kill somebody." And rather than allow that, what does the computer do? He destroys himself. And so suddenly, Consolidated doesn't have a computer anymore. Just like that. And I just have to wonder, that's not very well designed. It's like a robot has to, as it were, destroy itself if it's unable to prevent a human being from coming to harm. Or else, if something it's obliged to do by some urgent necessity amounts to harm to a human being, it's like, this is so bad, I must destroy myself rather than allow that to happen. And we're dealing with extremely expensive things. Consolidated's computer was a very expensive thing. It'll take them 7 years to replace. They say that somewhere in there. So, I mean, that's, that's not something you allow to just be ruined because, oops, you accidentally told it to hurt a human being. And the brain, as we have by Robot and Mechanical Men Corporation, Susan Calvin company that she's with, seems to have kind of the same problem, other than it's a little more sophisticated, and of course they've got the capable Susan Calvin on hand to find ways to try to frame the question in a way that would keep the computer from maybe getting too badly injured by this attempt to explore a situation where a human being could get harmed. That's extremely bad design. There's just no getting around that. So, but if you just grant that rather silly premise, the cleverness they try to get around it, well, isn't half bad. Still isn't the greatest, because, alright, here's what Susan Calvin is proposing. We've got all these different pieces of data we're going to feed the computer about how we might get a ship to disappear from here and appear over there and go through hyperspace and transport human beings and blah-de-da-da-da. Now, she decides, I'll explain to the computer. I'm going to give this to you piece by piece. And if any piece means that, well, if it might cause harm to a human being, just spit it back to us. That's not bad. That's good. But she also couches it, don't be too serious about that. We're not taking human life too seriously. If a person is threatened by something that you might be calculating, don't take it too seriously. That's practically telling you to set aside the first law, as if you could. Not the best solution. The best is we're exploring a situation where, yes, we know that if it isn't performed sufficiently well, we could be talking about harm to human beings. Obviously, we don't want to actually do that, We're going to explore how this would work and then see if we can find ways to tweak how it would work to the point that it wouldn't actually involve harming human beings. Are you good with that, Mr. Brain? And then the computer could say, oh, that's okay. So instead it acts kind of silly, becomes a bit of a jokester. It's like when the brains start breaking down, they get like drunks. And that seems to be a motif through some of these stories. We saw the same thing with Speedy, for example, going around the selenium pool on Mercury. He's kind of saying all this weird poetry, quoting Gilbert and Sullivan of all things. And it's like, where's that from? Well, Asimov is a big fan of Gilbert. Sullivan, that explains that. But why should a robot become drunk like that? That could be hazardous. And that's what's kind of dangerous, is that these computers or robots and so forth end up destroying themselves. Now, I mean, think about this. Powell and Donovan have been put on this ship designed by the computer, the brain. It's in effect designed it and set robots to work building it, and boom, here it is how many months later, all gleamingly perfect and, well, I don't know, perfect. It tries to figure out if you're hungry and gives you access to food when you are, and then everything just disappears back into the wall so cleanly you can't even see the seams where the doors opened up. It doesn't provide you any control, I guess, unless it decided to give that to you, but it doesn't at any point that we ever see, so we don't even know it can do that. So it'll open the door or close the door or not even tell you it's doing that. It'll suddenly zip you off into space and not tell you it's doing that, other than if you happen to be in one room out of how many rooms in this thing. Actually has a window you can look out, and if it's outer space, oh, we must be in outer space. Well, that's really helpful. And with one little guide that tells you nothing but how far you are from it. That's for me, and not allowing the people on the ship to communicate back. That to me is just unthinkable. So I wonder why Susan Calvin couldn't have said, are we allowed to talk to them? Yeah, okay. Why didn't it occur to her to say, how about for them to talk to us? I don't know. So, again, it's a story, it's still fun read and all, but it's definitely a story with some serious faults as a story. We're trying to solve this kind of rather arbitrary problem. The solution is in some ways good, in other ways so-so. And it kind of allows us to see Susan Calvin as the roboticist working with Powell and Donovan, who by this point really have become officially the field test engineers. Something not so clearly seen in the earlier stories, and they kind of had to inject that into the stories earlier on, and was fabricating, like, even the whole reason they're on Mercury and things like that. So the series of stories is starting to come together a little more like parts of iRobot rather than these just robot related stories, even though there's still obviously changes being made. Anyway, that is Paradoxical Escape by Isaac Asimov. Thank you for listening.